Hello, and welcome to the lecture on Chapter 2, which is about perception of self and others. So we're going to start by looking at some concepts related to issues of the self as well as disclosure. And by disclosure, I mean what you choose to tell people about yourself. But first, let's talk about self-concept. Self-concept, it's how you perceive yourself. When you think about yourself, what do you think of yourself? Do you see yourself as being a hard worker? Do you see yourself as being lazy? Do you see yourself as being generous? Do you see yourself as being stingy? Right? How do you, a good person, a bad person, what have you? How do you perceive yourself? And this is strongly influenced by a few factors. The first one, a hugely important one, is others' images of you. How others see you, and this forms what Cooley called the looking glass self. And I want to take a moment to talk about the looking glass self because I think it's really, really important to understand it, how it affects us, and how people sometimes make choices that aren't in their own best interest just because of what others have said about them. So looking glass self, the idea is that that's you, right? That image is meant to represent you, sort of abstract, but there you are, so that's you. And that circle there, that's the looking glass, which is a mirror. Right? So it's a mirror. But the idea in the looking glass self, as opposed to you look in the mirror and you see an accurate reflection of yourself, what you have are other people. Right? Those images there represent other people. And then it's about what do they say about you? Do they comment on what a kind person you are, how generous you are? Do they often comment on how you seem to can't do anything right? How you don't seem very smart? Why do you even bother trying? You're probably going to fail. What sorts of things do they say about you? Because the things they say about you contributes then to what you see in the mirror. So what you see in the mirror isn't who you are. What you see in the mirror is what who other people tell you you are. That's the looking glass self. So if you ever wonder why and maybe this might even be you, and I'm sorry, why people stay in abusive relationships, why they stay in jobs where people are rude to them and insult them. Sometimes it's a lack of options, and it gets a bit more complicated, but many times it has to do with the messages that people are hearing about themselves. Who else would ever love or want you? Who else would ever bother giving you a chance and hiring you, right? Those sorts of things change how we see ourselves. That's the looking glass self. So others' images of you. Other things that influence our self-concept are the comparisons we make with others, right? It ends up being very culturally dependent, of course, in terms of what it is we're supposed to value, which I'll talk about in a moment here. But our comparison to others, we see other people doing things. You think, man, they're so good about spending their time helping others. I don't know if I do that. I don't think I'm a very generous person that way, right? So we compare ourselves with others. Cultural teachings, this is what I was alluding to just a moment ago. Cultural teachings have to do with what it is we've been told we should be. And so if in our culture, which should be defined many different ways, if the value of a person is closely related to how much money they make, right, cultural teachings are going to strongly affect how you perceive yourself depending upon how much money you make, right? Maybe a cultural teaching has to do with, it could be a religious culture, and then the things that you do, and so not properly participating in religious practice may say that you're a bad person, and so that may be something that challenges or bothers or troubles you in your self-concept because you're being told, based on the religious background you come from, that you're not a good person because you are doing or not doing something, right? So those cultural teachings affect that. And then also, self-evaluations. Just when we look at ourselves and where we are, what we want our lives to be like, how do we think we're doing? Those self-evaluations. Those all together form our self-concept. So you'll see how it's both about how we see ourselves, but how much we see ourselves comes from the culture we're in, how we see ourselves compared to others, what others say about us. So the concept we have of ourselves is strongly related to how we connect with others, right? Because communication, C-O-M-M, communication, community, there's a reason those things sound the same, right? They're linked in this idea of connection to others. As we move on to talking about the connection to others, in self-concept and disclosure, we get to the Johari window. And so the Johari window, the book uses it to talk about self-concept, and I will do that here. And by the way, when we talk about self-concept, it's also been used to talk about organizational identity. There's a board of directors I sit on, really it's a business board, I suppose. And at our annual retreat this last year in January, actually somebody brought out the Johari window, a trainer we had, to help us talk about the way that we see who are we as an organization. So my point is it gets used in organizational studies just as it does in sort of self-reflective studies. So we're talking about here the way it affects self-concept, and it's also hugely important in understanding disclosure. So I'm going to use the Johari window to talk about both those things, self-concept and disclosure. So the Johari window deals with what we know about ourselves and what others know about us, right? So here's the sort of window, I guess, and there's 4 panes to the window. And the first pane to the window is that first square, is the open pane. And these are things, whether it's concept or like self-disclosure courses about information we share, whether it's the identity that we have or information about us, we know it about ourselves and others know it about us, right? It's some things that others know about us and that we know about ourselves, we never have to tell them. When you see me, if you recall the images you've seen of me, very, very fair skin, the red hair, so identify as white. Most people would assume that I do. I don't have to tell you that, probably. Right, so some things, right, are very, very obvious, and other things you may only know once I tell you, like, for instance, a religious affiliation. So open are things that are known to others and known to ourselves. Hidden, sort of, is what it sounds like. Things that we know, but we've decided to hide from others. So others don't know these things about us. It's something they don't know about us in terms of our self-concept, or it's just information they don't know about us. So you may be a person who feels a lot of guilt, but you don't tell other people about that. They may not see it. Just like about things you may not decide to tell them, right? So blind refers to things that we do not see or know about ourselves, but others do. So in terms of self-concept, people might see you as being a fairly generous person. They might see you as being a patient person, but that's not something that you recognized about yourself, right? Is that maybe you're a patient person, right? Blind might also be information that others know about you that you don't know about yourself. When I was doing some genealogy, family tree research, I came across information about a family member who does not know that they were born out of wedlock, and that their parents have been giving them a false wedding date. But I found the actual record that was signed by them when they got married. And so, right, so that person doesn't know they were born out of wedlock, or that thing about their parents, and I do know it. And I've not shared it with them, not because being born out of wedlock is a great shame, but that it would upset this individual to know that about them and their parents, and so I just let it go, right? And there's the unknown, the things we don't know about ourselves, the things that others don't know about us. And there might be some context where other people do know them about us, even though we don't know them, right? So sometimes that something may be to one person, in our relationship with one person, it's just in the blind because they know it about it, but we don't know it about ourselves. Whereas in other places, another person doesn't know it, and still the first person does it. That might be confusing. I'll come back to it in a second. But the unknown, the other person doesn't, you don't know it, and other people don't know it about you either. And again, this could be a talent you have. This could be health information about you, right? So it can be information. It can be self-concept. So all of these 4 panes, the size of them, vary tremendously by our relationships. Depending on which relationship we're in, some things are in open, some things are in a hidden, some things are in open, some are in a blind, some are in the open, some are unknown, right? And it all depends upon the relationship that we have. So, for example, here we have a relationship where many things are open. You've shared or made or allowed another person to know something about you and things that you're aware of yourself. There's not as much that you're hiding from them that they don't know. There are some things that perhaps they know about you didn't know that they've told you, they've shared with you about your habits. I think about the time I had a good friend I work with who said to me something about, so when you come into work, you're angry. I said, what? No, I'm not. I wasn't angry, but I was coming across very stern because when I come into work, especially right before a class, I come in really focused on thinking about my class and what I have to do, and I sort of don't see other people. I don't stop and talk to other people. I'm not angry, right? But again, they sort of see that intensity to me that I didn't realize I was putting off. But when they shared that with me, it went from blind to open, right? And again, that unknown, I've shared a lot with that person, and they see a lot of things about me, whether they tell me about it or not. So that means the unknown isn't as large, right? In another relationship, there may be just tons of things I don't share with a person. There's not a whole lot about me that's in the blind that they know about me that I don't know about myself. Maybe they know I have bad breath and they haven't shared that with me, but that might be it. But there's just tons of stuff that are hidden and a good deal of things that are unknown. Think about when you're there, just checking out the grocery store. They don't know a lot about you, right? You have a lot of things that you're hiding from them, and that's okay. It's not hiding is not bad in this case. That's actually very appropriate, right? So Johari Window just helps us to recognize there are many things about us that relationship by relationship we conceal from other people, or other people know about us that they have or have not shared with us that we may or may not know, right? And so it varies by relationship, and that's both self-concept as well as things that we might self-disclose. So on this topic of self-disclosure, I want to spend a few minutes here. It's a topic I find very interesting and I care a lot about. So I want to talk just for a moment about self-disclosure rewards. And that I'm not a big fan of the word rewards. I think of benefits. I think rewards sounds a little bit too much like, a treat for, like with my son who I'm potty training, or the dog, to go to her room at night. But anyway, rewards. So one thing about self-disclosure is self-knowledge. That as you talk about things that you're going through, they're happening to you, as you hear it, you start processing and it makes more sense to yourself. This is a good bit, not all, but a good bit of what therapy is about. It's about talking about things, and as you talk about it, saying, I guess I never really thought about it, but I guess perhaps the reason I'm so upset here is because blah, blah, blah. Right? So self-disclosure can be really important because it can create self-knowledge. It can help us cope with things better, right? By telling somebody something, challenges we have, things that are going on with us, we can often cope better. This is this idea of catharsis, right? Catharsis is, and forgive me for using this expression, but catharsis is like, an emotional poop. You sort of get it out and go, ah, right? So it's improved coping abilities when we just share things. Just allows us to manage stress more by talking about things that are upsetting us, and getting that out can be a catharsis. It's a sense of relief from moving that out of ourselves, right? It can enhance our communication, right? Self-disclosure can be a way just to improve those connections, relationships we have with people. And on that note, self-disclosure can also help to have more meaningful relationships with people, right? So as you share more with a person, that relationship is going to seem more meaningful. The relationship, again, you have at the checker at the grocery store doesn't seem very meaningful because there's nothing being disclosed. But somebody is likely a close friend to you because of how much they know about you and you're able to share with them. And that's part of what makes it a meaningful relationship. It's one of the reasons that family relationships or familiar relationships, even when they're unhealthy, often can feel very close to us many times, right? Is because of how much they know about us, good, bad, and otherwise. And also, self-disclosure can be really important to prevent inaccurate perceptions. Telling people what you're going through and how you feel and why you feel bad about yourself or what have you can help the other person say, whoa, hey, hold on, I don't think that's true at all, right? So it can be really helpful then in, as we say, preventing inaccurate perceptions. So there are certain dangers in self-disclosures. As we talk about all the many benefits of it, there are certain risks that come from disclosing. And I want to take a few minutes to reiterate those from the book because I just think they're so important. I think the book's pretty clear, but I think these are hugely important. I want them to be takeaways from this class. So one is that when we disclose, there are certain personal risks, right? That people are now going to they know more information about us. By knowing that information, they can share that information with others. And we have to decide how we feel about it once we share that information with them. So there are personal risks, right? There are relationship risks. Once you tell somebody something, uh, how do they feel about this relationship now? If you are in a relationship, or even, think about professional relationships. If you're working with a client or a customer, and do you tell them about something you did that you're sort of embarrassed by with another client or customer? Because they then may not think as much of you, right? There's a certain sort of relationship risk that can happen there. There are professional risks when you share things. We think about what we share on social media and the way that can affect us professionally as we go to get a job, as we apply for schools and graduate schools, right? Those are professional risks. If you are at work and you're talking about the wild partying you like to do, I mean, you can't do it now because you should be self-isolating, but the partying you do outside the workplace, others may see you as being not sufficiently responsible or mature or grounded or I don't know what, and then be less inclined to promote you or give you other opportunities, right? So there can be professional risks. In terms of self-disclosure, there are some guidelines for making self-disclosures. One is consider the motivation. When you go to disclose, why are you telling this information and why are you telling this person? If it is that you just want to be able to share with somebody you trust, that's good. But if you just need to share it with somebody, is this that person to share it with? But so consider the motivation. Why am I sharing this? Do I want them to understand me better, to know why it is I've seemed so upset lately? It's because I have a family issue going on, so I'm telling my coworkers about it, right? Is that the motivation? Is it just venting? Think about that motivation. What's your goal in self-disclosing? So in terms of appropriateness, this is both what's personally and professionally appropriate to share, right? So I've been appalled before by what in professional context, like say a hygienist, has shared with me about their personal life while they're cleaning my teeth. Actually, it wasn't a hygienist; it was a dental assistant. Excuse me. Was not doing a cleaning, it was assisting on a procedure. Anywho, but still, like what was being shared with me, I thought, well, how is that appropriate? You may well have had the experience of a teacher or a professor who shared things and you thought, why? First of all, this is not appropriate. You tell me about your personal issues like this, and you think the motivation, why are you sharing this with me? Do you think we're equal? Do you want me to feel bad for you? Like, what is the motivation, right? So consider the appropriateness of the information that you're sharing. Right. Consider disclosures of the other person. What have they been sharing with you? Is this far out from what they've shared with you? Would this not be as appropriate then for you to share? Right. So if they've been talking about some of the ups and downs at work, someone's been talking about the ups and downs of some of their personal relationships. Okay, it might seem sort of appropriate to share the same thing. You don't have to. It might seem sort of appropriate though to do that. But if they've always kept it strictly professional, then going and complaining about the crisis you're having in your personal life, it it may not be the best choice. It might be okay because you feel safe with them. You want to see where this relationship is going with them. Are they going to be used more in the colleague? But think about that. What sorts of things are they sharing? Is what you're sharing now going to be really far out of bounds of what you two have already established as a pattern of sharing? Right? And think about the burdens of these disclosures. Especially this is true upon the relationships of adults with children, right? I think about caregivers, parents, and so forth. That they what things that they might say that then burden their children. You may have experienced this in your childhood. That whoever is raising, in being raised, whoever is there caring for you, shared with you personal struggles they were having. That had to do with work, that had to do with money, that had to do with relationships, and how that may have burdened you, right? Other times in the workplace, a colleague may share things with you. You may think about sharing something with somebody, but consider the way that it might impact them, right? So things like, hey, don't tell anybody, but I wasn't really sick last week. Instead, I just went on vacation, but I didn't think I'd get permission for leaving, so I just called in sick for a week. That person has to carry that information around with them because they're now responsible for it, which is a whole other theory I won't get into. But when people are given information, they become responsible for it, and it might burden them, and it's something that you should be aware of, right? And so that means as they're carried around, can you accept the possible consequences of what might happen with this person having it and what they might choose to do with it, right? Are you going to feel okay with that, with it being repeated by them, or what choices they might make with that information? And I've been talking about all the ways that disclosure can be very good, and that a lot of times disclosure can be, or sort of intimated there, it can be a part of a reciprocation, right? Other things shared, so now you're going to share. You don't have to ever share anything you don't want to. So guidelines for resisting the pressure to self-disclose, because sometimes we can be pressured to share. But remember that first off, don't ever be pushed to share anything you don't want to share. It's your information. You have the right to tell people or not. You can be assertive in your refusal. Doesn't mean being aggressive. Doesn't mean, screw you for asking. But just saying, I don't feel comfortable talking about that. Or that's not something I want to get into. That's being assertive, right? It's not something I want to get into. It's honest, it's true, it's assertive without being aggressive, which is saying, and how dare you, jerk, right? So being assertive in your refusal, right? You can delay the decision. If you're not sure if you're ready to share that with them, just say, maybe we'll talk about it some other time. Right? Right. Or just if you're thinking about just opening up and sharing something in general, and you're not really sure if it's the right person or place or time, hold off on it. You can delay the decision. Right. And last, remember, you can always just move to another topic. They're talking about something and they're hoping you're going to share, move on to another topic. But do remember that it's your information and you have the right to decide who's going to have it. So that's what I have about self-disclosure. Now we're going to move on to perception, and we'll pick that up with the next lecture.